We come to the 12th presentation in this year-long series, and it bears the generic title Parayana, the way beyond, the way above, paradise, paranormal, but it in Sanskrit, as in the Buddhist time, it was the way across. It's the way across a cessation. In Sanskrit, the Hindu term from the Vedas, like the Rig Veda and its derivatives, the Sami Veda and so forth, the word moksha means extinction. It means that a yogic power has come to the end of the magical powers, and beyond that there is the consciousness that it is moksha. It's extinguished. The ability, the need, the control of power and powers in the universe has reached its limit, and you've gone beyond. And the classic Buddha, doing a transform of the Hindu means the religion of Hind, the ancient word for India in terms of its people, whereas the ancient term for India was Bharata in terms of the history of India, of the people. But the classic Buddha changed. Instead of moksha, it was nirvana. And to have reached nirvana, he said, everything that has been lifted up has been lifted up. Everything that needed to be taken down has been taken down. Nirvana. The deeper quality of that was a series of 16 sutras that were woven together. Sutra means thread. And when you have a pattern of threads, you have a fabric. And the fabric of those 16 was called Parayana, the way beyond. It's the way beyond nirvana. It is the way beyond, the way across moksha. So that the nothingness that is outside of the actionable universe is able to be entered. The way beyond, the Parayana, goes to further dimensions that the universe has not yet expanded to, that the universe is not phenomenal in. And in those further dimensions, what occurs in the Parayana. This particular year is an exploration of how the impress of that not only went forward from the classic time of the Buddha, but went in a symmetry back in time from the classic time of the Buddha, so that the Parayana from about 500 BC began to have a parenthetical, echoing wave form all the way through civilization. And because it came in such a energetic wave form, large-scale wave forms, it became apparent about 500 years later that those waveforms were energy waves. They were the energy waves of civilization. We today in physics would call them density waves. And those waves made the sense that phenomenal reality is an energy that is able to become matter, is able to become phenomenon, and exist in space and also exist in time, and that there's a fabric, space-time, in which they exist, in which they have phenomenality, but that their origin is the emergence out of a primordialness that was not yet formed, not yet into phenomenon. In Eskimo, Inuit mythology, they say that in the beginning the world was slush. It wasn't yet ice. It wasn't water. It was just slush. It was a chaos. It was a mixture. The quality of emergence out of this slush, we would today call it a primordial plasma, has just been talked about on the web and many, many sites of the discovery by astronomers, astrophysicists at the Harvard-Smithsonian Institution, that there were gravity waves confirmed by experiment at the very beginning of what is called the Big Bang. It is a major breakthrough in astrophysics, the first direct detection of primordial gravitational waves, which are the first shock after the Big Bang, which marked the birth of the universe. One of the most important discoveries of all time just happened. Gravity waves are those density waves. Those density waves, gravity waves, have a tone, and their tone is that they integrate, they bring together. They bring together in such a way that there are increasing variations of how they come together. And so there is a quality where the universe, before there are particles, before there are atoms, before there are subatomic particles, there is this slush, this plasma, that instantly that it appears in time, the space that blossoms with it, out of it, shows that there are already gravity waves, already density waves that are coursing before there is matter, before there is particles. There are particles. And so the quality of understanding this, though it seems somewhat mysterious to 21st century physics in terms of very high dharma, it's understandable in the following way, that what triggers the emergence is time, and that time is an energy. It is an energy that comes out of a field that is pre-primordial, that one can only call nature. And we do. And we give it a gender. We call her Mother Nature. And as time comes forth spontaneously, because there was no time before, there was only the field, a kind of a zero field, not a 0 point, but a zero field. 0 points vanish. They absorb. They don't occur. They're fictional. But a zero field is capable of being real before it is existential, before it is phenomenal. So that the existentiality of time emerging blossoms into the phenomenality of space instantly, because now time as an energy, the high Dharma way was to say time is now coursing, and as it courses, it emanates space, the 3 dimensions of space. So that while space-time looks like a seamless fabric, it has stages. it has a primordiality. It has an emergence into time and thus existential, and then instantly it has the ability to resonate as space, so that if you count, there's 1, 2, 3. And so the triad, the trinity, if you will, the tris magic, the thrice greatest magic, the Trismegistus, is to be able to understand that phenomenality and existentiality and reality are 3 different stages, as it were, and that wisdom can have a retrospective where one understands phenomenality first, and then one understands the refinement of existence. And finally, one comes to the nirvana moksha, the extinction nirvana, and one can go across that because one has a thrice greatest wisdom. And so the emergence of a Hermes, a guide of the spirits, of the souls. One has a guide who is able to take one to all 3 levels. And the going to the 3 levels from the world begins with phenomenality, refines itself through fermentation to an existentiality, and then distills that into the 3rd greatest, and that is the ability to come across to the Parayana, to the high Dharma. The world is capable of truths, phenomenal truths. The existentiality that ferments and refines out of that is able to come to a very refined truth. But the distillation of that is able to come to the high Dharma of reality. And so we are looking at this during this year, all the presentations, each Saturday morning. It is a quality of being able to attend to a continuity that is able to go through the phenomenality of the world to the existentiality of the universe to the reality of the cosmos. Because contemporary with the historical Buddha was Pythagoras. And it's Pythagoras who gave the Greek term cosmos to reality, that it is not only what the phenomena are, it's not only what the existentiality behind the phenomena are, it is the reality within which an existentiality behind a phenomenality can, in its vibratory dancing of energy, make the world. In the dance, it is a Maya. In the ability to choreograph the dance, it is a Dharma, but the ability to go with accumulated energy waves, density waves, back to before the primordiality to go into the reality. This is a high Dharma. We're looking at the developments by which this occurrence of what I have just delivered was brought into a perfection about 90 AD, 90s AD in Alexandria, between 90 and say 100 AD, in that decade. And out of that came not just a confluence, not just an integral, but in its complementarity, a differential, the differential consciousness, the dimensions of differential consciousness that become apparent in existentiality behind the phenomenality, but progressively then refine the accumulated penetration not only into the future, but into not just the past, but reshaping, transforming the past so that the future and the new past become able to be real as a continuum. And it is that continuum that is the zero infinite fields, the zero field of nature, the infinite field of consciousness, coming into a tunable pair. And is that is the high Dharma composition. That's the scalar that one can work on. And by the last decade of the 1st century AD, this was expressed in the classic Hermetica, which were almost immediately sabotaged. They were sabotaged by those that did not contest it so much, but effectively by those that tried to ignore it. And they predated those ignoring it, those making no issue with it whatsoever, predated 90 AD. And those then that sought to commandeer it and lead it off into different directions were after 100 AD. And so one finds an interesting, again, kind of parenthesis of ignorance and of hijacking. And so it takes a long time to be able to settle into the fermentation and to master the way in which water becomes wine. But to be able to distill the wine into the cognac takes an even longer time, and it is only in recent times that there was a penetration capable of being able to go to the cognac, to the liqueur, as in alchemy one calls it, the spirits. One now not only has the water into wine, one has the wine into spirits. And actually the first spirit ever made was chartreuse in France. Green chartreuse was made about 1,000 years ago, and it was potent. It's still for sale for very much money on very rare sites in the world. And there's a yellow chartreuse, which is somewhat less, but the green chartreuse, if you try a little shot, you will have trouble swallowing it. Is devastatingly potent. The thrice greatest spirit can be devastatingly penetrable because it does not shred the world, but it makes the world that had become transparent through wisdom invisible. Whereas the spirit was invisible before, and the existentiality was transparently there, nevertheless, and the world was phenomenal. When one goes to the high Dharma spirit, it is the phenomenality of the world that becomes invisible. Because in the real, one has a scalar that exceeds the universe. And so a high Dharma teaching is careful to give an introduction to it that has the laving quality of the waves, but the waves that only become effective sets after a while and after acquaintance, so that one begins to build the strength to be real. And in Sanskrit, the strength to be real is called virya, out of which in Indo-European language we get the word virile in English. Virya is the strength, sometimes called fortitude. If you look at the classic major arcana of the tarot deck, strength is the 8th of the major arcana, and strength is always feminine. And it is the lion that would rule, be the king of beasts of the world. The jaws of the lion are held open by the woman, by the feminine. And her ability not only to hold the lion of the world from being able to bite, to feed, but in the high Dharma, the initial confrontation of that, she is able to endure the roar of the lion. With the caveat that men who are powerful in the world cannot endure the lion's roar. Whereas women, the feminine, while they hear the lion's roar, they feel the power of the lion's roar. They're able to persevere and not be daunted by the lion's roar, and to have then the fortitude, to have the strength to keep the lion of the world from biting and from consuming, and especially for consuming the children, the young, the babies, the unprotected, the growing, the stages of coming into life to where one is able to blossom not only existentiality into life, but to distill out of life love. And so love is a spirit, is a distilled spirit. And it is women, it is the feminine that carries this reality all the way through all of the levels, from here to the universe, to the cosmos, and beyond. So that when one comes to a very interesting focus that we've had for the last month, maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks, in Apuleius's The Golden Ass, because the protagonist is a man that becomes an ass. He becomes a donkey, a beast. And one of the stories that he hears is about Amor and Psyche. This is a study of Amor and Psyche, the psychic development of the feminine, a commentary on The Tale by Apuleius. This is by Erich Neumann. Erich Neumann was a Jungian analyst from Tel Aviv and one of the world's great psychiatrists, famous for his book, A History of Consciousness, done about 50, 60 years ago in the Bollingen series. Amor and Psyche also is there in the Bollingen series. It is Amor and Psyche that is one of the major stories in the books, the 11 books of the Golden Ass. The Greek title of it is Metamorphoses, the transformations. The Metamorphoses has this development of the discovery of love by the feminine. And it's near the close of book 4, and it goes through book 5 and into the beginning of book 6. So it's like a fulcrum in those 11 books. It is the basis by which, if you learn the ancient dynamics of being able to penetrate something, the classic thing was always the spear thrower, the javelin thrower. And in order to really heft a javelin, one grabs it 1/3 of the way from the edge and 2/3 of it forward, and one can do a thrust that then penetrates. The spear, in order to kill the animal, has to go through the hide. You have to really throw it. The tale of Cupid and Psyche is that balance point in the Metamorphoses by which one can grab, one can put a hand on, one can come into the feel of how that dynamic needs to be balanced in order to throw, in order to penetrate through the resistances. The point of that javelin, of that throw, is the 11th book of the Metamorphoses, and the 11th book is called the Isis book. It is about the mature, feminine love that comes into being able to reach through the ultimate beast of confrontation for all life, through its existential base, into the reality out of which all of that must eventually have originated and still mysteriously be there in like a very large way. The universe that one can see is only 4%. 96% you can't see. It's dark matter, dark energy, which are both from ineffable reality, which is not seeable at all, nevertheless is real. She is able to reach from the real in that feminine way and bring life back out of death, to be the way in which the hand, the pivot, is able to throw the javelin of rebirth so that one can live again. And so it is the ability for psyche, the Greek word psyche actually originally meant butterfly, and became then the psyche, which is a butterfly which comes out of the cocoon made by the caterpillar of normal phenomenality into the transform of the butterfly, the psyche. The transform to psyche is already a fermentation through that cocoon, through that womb. But it is the ability to distill life into a very high Dharma wisdom that brings rebirth into, from the real into reality. Into reality in the universe, into reality in the world, any world. Anywhere that life is, one can bring it back. There is not only a rebirth of human beings, there is a rebirthing of any form of life in the universe whatsoever, through the powers of the real. Isis, in the current studies of Isis, just to bring two books out, one here by Tom Cavelli, published by Quest Books, Embodying Osiris, the Science of Alchemical Transformation, because the first person that Isis brings back into rebirth is her dead husband Osiris. He is not only dead, he is dismembered. He is dismembered into 14 parts by his antagonist, Set. The image of Set in ancient Egypt was that of a desert red dog, a mad desert red dog. That kind of God now has disdain for life, especially human life that has all of these pretensions, all of these capabilities, and before they get these capabilities, they must be torn apart, dismembered. And Osiris is dismembered into 14 parts and scattered throughout that center of the known world. And Isis goes around patiently in her fortitude. She collects all of the fragments, all of the members of Osiris, and puts them back together into a living Osiris. And so another great book is called Remembering Osiris. Number, gender, and the word in ancient Egyptian representational systems. They're not representational, they're presentational. The existential quality is that they're presented. The representation is an image which is a part of the phenomenal world. But the existential is presentational. But the high dharma is that it is real. That it is. The 11th book of Apuleius begins with the man who has been turned into an ass, into a beast, comes face to face with Isis, and her differential conscious reality is able to bring the man back into resurrection out of the beast. And in doing so, the beast become a man again, is able to recognize that Queen of Heaven, whether you are Ceres, nurturing mother, and Ceretrix of crops, who in your joy at finding your daughter again set aside the ancient acorn, fodder for wild beasts, and taught man the use of civilized food, and now fructify the plowlands of Eleusis, or whether you are Venus, Urania, who in the first beginning of the world, by giving birth to love, brought together the opposite sexes, and so with never-ending regeneration perpetuated the human race, and now are worshipped. And he goes on saying that Isis has so many facets that she is the way in which all of those facets make a jewel. And it is only by cutting the jewel out of the thread of material that goes all the way through the different levels of cosmos, universe, world, us, able to penetrate all the way to the real and bring it through. It is this quality of rebirthing that is the penultimate treatise out of the 14 classic Hermetica. The first is the Poimandres, the mind shepherd, the creative mind shepherd, watching over the flock of high wisdom. And the 13th is the rebirth. The 14th was the high Dharma perfect sermon. The first is sometimes called the general sermon. The second was the Sermon on the Mountain, the Sermon on the Mount. And the third is the perfect sermon. And that Asclepius was lost because of very devious powerful reasons. In antiquity, in the early 200s AD, which we will talk about more next week in depth, of how it was lost, that lost Hermetica was the Asclepius, the perfect sermon, that was translated into Latin by Apuleius, not a part of the Golden Ass, but a separate saving of that dialogue in Latin, which is the only way that we have evidence, because the Greek original was effaced permanently, so those powers thought, those persons thought, no one will ever find it again because it won't be even in existence. But the high Dharma knows how to go beyond existence, not only beyond the world, but beyond existence, and reach the real. Let's take a break.